A poor girl walks into the bank carrying a box of dolls and says, "I want to trade them for money so I can buy medicine for my little sister." The young billionaire hears her, and what he does next leaves everyone in shock. The bank was crowded that Tuesday. People in suits talked on their cell phones, others checked papers or looked impatiently at their watches. The sound of fingers tapping on keyboards and the low murmur of conversations filled the air-conditioned environment. That was when the glass door opened. A small girl entered, bringing with her the warmth from the street. Her feet were bare and dirty, a stark contrast to the shiny floor. She carried a colorful cardboard box, holding it carefully as if transporting a treasure. Some curious glances turned in her direction, but they quickly went back to their business. The girl took a deep breath, adjusted the box in her arms, and walked determinedly to the service counter. "Hi, sir," she said, her clear voice trying to stand on tiptoe to be seen by the teller. "Can I talk to you?" The man in the blue tie looked up from his monitor, frowning when he saw the child. "Where's your mother?" "She's at work," the girl replied without hesitation. "I came by myself." The teller sighed, clearly annoyed. "What do you want?" The girl placed the box on the counter and opened it carefully. Inside, 5 dolls of different sizes and styles were neatly arranged, some with handmade outfits. "I want to trade them for money," she explained, pointing at the dolls. "My sister is sick and needs medicine. Mom doesn't have any money because she's out of work, but my sister can't wait." Her voice did not tremble. There was no drama in her words, just the simple, direct logic of a child solving a problem. The teller's face hardened. He looked around, as if searching for someone who should be supervising the girl. "We don't do charity here, kid," he said in a cutting tone. "This is a bank, not a donation center. We don't buy used toys." The little girl did not step back. "But they're good dolls. This one," she picked up a brown-haired doll, "is Liza. She sings when you press her tummy. And this one—" "I already said no," the teller interrupted, raising his voice. "Please take your things and leave. There are people waiting to be served." The girl's cheeks turned slightly red, but she did not cry. She began to put the dolls back with the same care she had shown them. A few customers in line watched the scene, uncomfortable, but none said a word. A security guard approached, drawn by the small commotion. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking sternly at the child. "This girl is disrupting service," the employee explained. "She came in trying to sell toys." The security guard grabbed the girl's arm firmly. "All right, time to leave. This is no place for children on their own." It was at that moment that a firm voice cut through the air. "Let go of the girl." All eyes turned to a man in a grey suit who had stood up from one of the waiting chairs. Ethan Carter, at 38, was well known in that bank. A director of a tech company, he always kept a low profile and rarely spoke beyond what was necessary to complete his transactions. "Mr. Carter," the security guard began, visibly uncomfortable. "I said, let her go," Ethan repeated, approaching. "Now." The guard loosened his grip, and the girl pulled her arm back, hugging her box of dolls to her chest. "Leave her alone," Ethan continued, looking directly at the teller. "This girl has more manners and courage than many people in here." The entire bank went silent. Parallel conversations stopped, and even the sound of keyboard tapping ceased. Ethan, who never interfered in anything, was standing up for a barefoot child that no one else had noticed. Ethan crouched down to the girl's eye level. His eyes, usually cold in business meetings, now conveyed unexpected kindness. "What's your name?" he asked in a gentle voice. "Emily," she answered, still clutching the box, but without fear. "And what's going on with your little sister, Emily?" The question brought a small smile to the girl's face, as if she felt relieved that someone finally wanted to listen. "She's had a fever since last night. She's coughing a lot and can't really sleep," Emily explained. "Mom says she needs medicine, but she doesn't have any money right now. She lost her job." "I thought I could help." Ethan looked at the box. "And you were going to give up your dolls for that?" Emily nodded. "Liza, Penny, Dora, Tina, and Baby. They're my friends, but my sister needs them more now." The bank was still quiet. Some people lowered their eyes, ashamed. Ethan took his wallet out of his pocket and removed a $100 bill. The girl's eyes widened. She had never seen so much money at once. "You don't need to give up your dolls," he said, placing the money in Emily's small hand. "Use this to buy whatever's necessary." Emily looked at the bill, then at her dolls, and finally at Ethan. "Are you sure, mister? That's a lot of money." Ethan smiled, a smile he had not given in months. "I'm sure." Emily put the money in the pocket of her faded dress and closed the box. "Thank you," she said, with a formality that seemed out of place in someone so small. "My sister will get better now." She turned to leave, then paused and looked at the teller who had treated her poorly. "I'm sorry I bothered you, sir." And she left, the box of dolls held tightly in her arms, passing through the glass doors back into the world outside. Ethan remained standing, watching her go. Something inside him stirred, a sensation he had forgotten. Without thinking twice, he grabbed his briefcase and headed in the same direction. Before completely exiting, Ethan stopped at the door and turned around. His gaze swept across the silent bank, meeting the faces that were now watching him. "You all saw what happened here," he said, his voice calm but firm enough to fill the space. "A child asked for help, and we treated her like a nuisance. She's willing to give up what she loves to care for her sister, while we complain about waiting 5 minutes in line." He looked directly at the teller, who now seemed to shrink behind the counter. "Maybe we should learn from her what it really means to have courage and compassion. The world outside is already harsh enough without us making each other invisible." No one responded. Some faces showed shame, others reflection. Ethan did not wait for a reaction. He pushed open the door and left, determined to catch up to Emily. The bank slowly returned to its usual murmur, but something in the air had changed. One simple gesture and honest words had exposed how blind they had all become to what truly mattered. Ethan had to quicken his pace to catch up with Emily. She walked with determination, her box of dolls still pressed tightly in her small arms, her bare feet moving familiarly over the hot pavement. When he finally reached her side, the girl looked up, surprised. "Hi again, mister," Emily said, slowing her pace a bit. "Hi, Emily," Ethan replied, matching his step to hers. "I thought I'd walk with you to the pharmacy. The streets can be dangerous for a girl walking alone." Emily seemed to think about the offer for a moment, regarding him with some curiosity. Then she shrugged and smiled. "Okay, that's not too far." They walked side by side. Ethan, used to rushing between meetings and commitments, felt something strange in that slower pace. The sun beat down on the sidewalk, and he noticed how Emily instinctively avoided the hottest parts of the pavement. "Don't you have shoes?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "I have one pair for school," she explained matter-of-factly. "But Mom says I have to take good care of them, so I only wear them when I really need to." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. While he worried about which car to buy next, this child was saving the only pair of shoes she owned. "And these are your dolls?" he asked, nodding toward the box. Emily's face lit up. "They are. Want to meet them?" Without waiting for an answer, she stopped and lifted the lid of the box. One by one, she introduced each doll as though presenting real friends. "This is Liza," she said, showing a brown-haired doll in a faded blue dress. "She's the oldest and looks after the others when I'm at school." She took out another doll, this one with red hair and a sewn-up arm. "This is Penny. She's the most adventurous. One time she fell off the roof when we were trying to see the stars," she said, pointing to the stitched arm. "Mom fixed it." Ethan noticed the care in the stitching, done by someone who, even having very little, worked hard to preserve what they had. "And this is Dora," Emily continued, holding up a black doll with curly hair. "She's the smartest. She knows all the answers to the math homework." She took out another, smaller and newer than the others. "Tina is the artist. She draws better than anybody." Lastly, she removed a very small doll, almost like a baby. "And this is Baby. She doesn't have another name yet because she hasn't decided what she wants to be called. We're waiting for her to grow up a bit." The simplicity and depth of Emily's imagination moved Ethan. He realized each doll had a personality, a story. "And did you make up a song to help them sleep?" The girl's face brightened even more. "How did you know?" "I just guessed," Ethan replied. "Special girls like you usually have special songs." Emily hesitated, appearing a little shy. "Do you want to hear it?" I'd love to. Right there on the sidewalk, while people hurried by, Emily sang softly a simple, sweet lullaby about stars that protect, colorful dreams, and a new day full of adventures. Her childish voice, gentle and slightly off-key, made Ethan smile, really smile, for the first time in a long while. They resumed walking, and Emily kept telling stories of her doll's adventures. Ethan listened attentively, asking questions that encouraged her to elaborate. It was as though, for a few moments, he forgot who he was, the always busy executive, always calculating the next move. They finally arrived at the pharmacy. The air conditioning greeted them with a cold blast that made Emily hold her box of dolls more tightly. "Do you know what medicine your sister needs?" Ethan asked. Emily nodded and pulled a small, repeatedly folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was somewhat dirty, but the careful handwriting on it was still legible. "Mom wrote it here. She said it's for fever and cough." Ethan took the paper and walked over to the counter with Emily at his side. While the pharmacist looked for the medications, the girl observed everything with attentive eyes. "Does your sister have any other symptoms besides fever and cough?" the man behind the counter asked. Before Ethan could say he didn't know, Emily answered, "She has a sore throat too, and last night she was breathing funny, making a noise." The pharmacist nodded, impressed by the clarity of her description. "Seems like a respiratory infection. These medications will help, but if she doesn't improve in 2 days, she'll need to see a doctor." Emily agreed seriously. "I'll tell my mom." While the pharmacist prepared the medications, Emily wandered a bit through the store, looking at the shelves. She stopped in front of a candy display, eyeing it with interest but not touching anything. "Would you like some chocolate?" Ethan asked, coming up beside her. She looked at the colorful sweets, then at the $100 bill she was still holding carefully. "No, thank you," she answered politely. "I should save the money for milk this week." That response, so adult, coming from someone so small, made Ethan's heart clench again. He crouched down to her level. "Emily, the money I gave you is for whatever you need. For medicine, for milk, and yes, even for a little chocolate once in a while." The girl seemed to consider that. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." A small smile appeared on her face. "Then can I get one for my sister too?" "For when she gets better." "Of course," Ethan replied, feeling a wave of affection for this child who, even with the chance to buy something for herself, thought of sharing first. At the register, Ethan insisted on paying for the medicines, the chocolates, and he even added vitamins and other basic items he realized might be helpful. Emily thanked him for each new item put in the bag, as if each one were a precious gift. When they left the pharmacy, the sun was still strong. Ethan held the door so Emily could pass first with her box of dolls and the bag of medicine. "You're very brave, you know," he said, looking at her with genuine admiration. Emily just smiled, a smile that seemed bigger than her small face. "I hope your sister gets better soon," Ethan continued. "Me too," Emily replied. "Thank you for helping." There was a moment of silence between them. It was not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken things, a connection neither had expected to find on that ordinary day. "Do you know your way home from here?" Ethan asked, suddenly worried about letting her go. "Yes, I do. I live over there." She pointed in a direction, "just 3 blocks away." Ethan nodded, still reluctant. "Then take care, Emily." "You too, mister." "Ethan," he corrected, smiling. "My name is Ethan." "Bye, Ethan," she said, trying out the name. "My doll's like you." With that, she turned and began to walk away, balancing the box and pharmacy bag. Ethan remained where he was, watching as her small figure got farther, turned a corner, and disappeared from view. He stayed there longer than he intended, feeling something both strange and familiar at the same time. A sensation that, amidst all his professional success and material achievements, he'd forgotten something fundamental. Something that this girl, with her bare feet and her box of dolls, seemed to carry effortlessly. Ethan did not know if he would ever see her again, but he was certain that, in some way, Emily had left something of herself with him, a reminder of simplicity, courage, and generosity he wouldn't forget anytime soon. 3 days passed since the encounter with Emily. Ethan returned to his usual routine, waking up early, endless meetings, important decisions, dining alone. but something had changed. Amid the financial spreadsheets and quarterly reports, Emily's face kept appearing in his mind as a silent reminder of another world that existed beyond the glass walls of his office. On Thursday, during a meeting with investors, Ethan found himself drawing little stars in the margin of his notes, stars like the ones Emily mentioned in her doll's lullaby. His assistant noticed his distraction, something unheard of in the 6 years they had worked together. "Is everything all right, Mr. Carter?" he asked discreetly after the investors left the room. "Yes, Robert, just thinking about some things." Robert nodded, respecting his boss's space but curious about what might be distracting a man usually so focused. That night, upon arriving at his top-floor apartment in an upscale building, Ethan felt the silence differently. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of an environment organized to his preferences. It was an echoing emptiness. He walked to the window, looking down at the illuminated city below, and wondered in which of those thousands of lights Emily might be, if her sister had gotten better, if the money had been enough. The next day, Ethan cancelled his afternoon meetings, something he had never done without a serious reason. He drove to the neighborhood where he had left Emily, parking near the pharmacy. It seemed like the logical starting point. He looked around, trying to remember which direction she had pointed in. 3 blocks, she said. But in which direction? The street was busy, ordinary people going about their daily routines. There was no sign of a small girl with a box of dolls. Ethan entered a small convenience store on the corner. The man behind the counter, an older gentleman with graying hair, eyed him with curiosity. "May I help you?" Ethan hesitated, feeling oddly out of place in his expensive clothes in such a simple environment. "I'm looking for a little girl. She's small, brown hair. Sometimes carries a box of dolls around here." The man frowned, visibly suspicious. "Who wants to know?" Ethan realized how suspicious he sounded. A man in a suit asking about a child in a modest neighborhood. "My name is Ethan Carter. I met her a few days ago, helped her buy medicine for her sister. I just wanted to know if everything's okay." The man continued to stare, evaluating his sincerity. "I don't know any little girl with dolls. Plenty of kids come by here." Ethan thanked him and left, feeling awkward. He had never had to navigate this sort of situation before. As an executive, people always came to him, always tried to please him. Here, he was just another stranger, and a suspicious one. At that, he kept walking around the neighborhood. He entered a bakery, a laundromat, another little market. Everywhere he got the same suspicious looks, the same vague answers. No one seemed to know Emily, or if they did, they didn't trust him enough to say. On the 3rd day of searching, Ethan was about to give up. He sat on a small park bench, watching children play in a nearby playground. None of them were Emily. Running his hand over his face, tired, he felt something in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw it was a small, laminated school ID card. It must have fallen out of Emily's box when she showed him her dolls, and he hadn't realized he still had it. The ID card had a small photo of her, smiling shyly. "Emily Santos, 3rd grade," it read in simple letters. The school's name was at the top, Jefferson Elementary School. Ethan felt a spark of hope. It was a real lead. He put the ID card away carefully and decided that the next day he would go to that school. Not to approach her there, that would be even more suspicious, but to try to figure out which area of the city she might live in. The next morning, he drove slowly around the vicinity of the school on the ID card. It was a modest but well-kept building with a small courtyard where children played before class. He parked across the street and watched, hoping to see Emily among the children arriving. After almost an hour, there was no sign of her. A worrying thought crossed Ethan's mind. What if her sister had gotten worse? What if the money wasn't enough? He felt an urgency he couldn't explain. It wasn't just curiosity. It was genuine concern for the well-being of that child who, in such a short time, had awakened something forgotten inside him. He returned to the neighborhood where he had last seen her. This time, he entered a small grocery store he had skipped on previous visits. A middle-aged woman was at the register. "Good morning," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "I'm looking for a little girl named Emily. Emily Santos. She lives around here." The woman studied him for a moment. "And who are you?" Ethan sighed, already expecting the suspicion. My name is Ethan Carter. I helped Emily a few days ago. She was trying to buy medicine for her sister and— Oh, you're the man from the bank, the woman interrupted, a look of recognition crossing her face. Ethan blinked, surprised. How do you know that? Emily told me. Said a nice man helped her at the bank and then went to the pharmacy with her. Little Emily can't stop talking about how you saved the day. The woman smiled, finally relaxing. I'm a friend of her mum. The girls sometimes come here to buy bread when they have a bit of change. Ethan's heart sped up. So, you know where they live? The woman hesitated, natural caution returning. Why do you want to know? I just wanted to check if they're okay. If her sister got better. If they need more help. The woman studied his face for a long moment and sighed. Look, I can't give you their address. I hope you understand my position, but I can tell you they live in this neighborhood, near the school. Ethan nodded, understanding her reluctance. I understand. If you see Emily, could you please tell her that Ethan asked if everything is all right? The woman nodded. I can do that. As Ethan was leaving, she added, Mr. Carter, they're going through a tough time. The mom is trying, but it's not easy raising two girls alone. Ethan thanked her for the information and left the grocery store, feeling strangely persistent. It was a different feeling from that of closing a big deal. This was more personal, more important somehow that he couldn't quite explain. Over the next week, Ethan returned to that neighborhood several times. He passed by the school at dismissal time, discreetly watching the children leaving May, but never found Emily. He walked through nearby streets, visited the small park, stopped at more stores, always with the ID card in his pocket, like a talisman. At night, in his increasingly empty and silent apartment, Ethan found himself thinking about Emily's dolls, about Lisa, who took care of the others, the adventurous Penny, the smart Dora, the artistic Tina, and Baby with no name. How could a child living in difficult conditions create such a rich world of imagination and affection? His co-workers noticed the change. Ethan, once so pragmatic and direct, now seemed distracted, thoughtful. Something had touched a part of him that had long been dormant, so long that he no longer knew it existed. What happened to you? His business partner asked after a meeting where Ethan suggested that the company donate to programs assisting disadvantaged children. Nothing, Ethan replied. I just realized a few things. In truth, it was more than that. With each day that went by without news of Emily, the emptiness inside him grew. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a genuine longing to know if she was well, if she needed more help, if there was more he could do. And perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it even to himself, it was also the desire to feel again that simple, true connection he experienced, walking by her side, listening to stories of dolls and made-up lullabies. It was a Saturday morning under a clear sky when Ethan decided to try one more time. 2 weeks had passed since he last saw Emily, and despite his frequent searches, he hadn't been able to find her. That morning, with no work commitments, he drove once again to the neighborhood, determined to walk more streets, visit more places. He parked his car near the school again and started walking aimlessly. The neighborhood had a different vibe on weekends. Kids playing on sidewalks, adults chatting on porches, music drifting from partly open windows. It was a world of simple joys, so different from the elegant coldness of his apartment. After almost an hour of walking, Ethan stopped in a small plaza to rest. He was about to give up when he heard a familiar voice humming softly. Turning around, he saw Emily sitting on the sidewalk in front of an old apartment building. She had her back to him, fully absorbed in whatever she was doing on the ground. As he got closer, Ethan realized she was drawing with colored chalk on the concrete, creating a vibrant world of shapes and characters. Next to her, her inseparable dolls were arranged like an audience. "Emily?" he called softly, so as not to startle her. The girl turned, her eyes widening in immediate recognition. A smile lit up her face. "Ethan, it's really you!" She jumped to her feet, wiping her chalk-covered hands on her already colorful dress. For a moment, Ethan thought she might run to hug him, but Emily held herself back, keeping a polite distance. though her eyes shone with joy. "I knew I'd see you again," she said, with the simple confidence of children. "How did you know?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Penny said you'd come back," Emily replied, pointing to one of the dolls. "She's good at guessing things," Ethan smiled, feeling a quiet joy spread within him. "Penny is very smart then." He looked at the drawings on the ground. "What are you working on?" "A treasure map for the dolls to explore," she explained, showing the colorful lines that intertwined, forming paths. "They're bored from staying home all the time." Ethan crouched down to get a better look. "That's an amazing map." "Thanks," Emily replied, visibly proud. Then her face grew more serious. "You disappeared. I thought maybe you had moved to another city." The simplicity of her observation touched Ethan. "No, I didn't disappear. I was actually looking for you." The girl's eyes widened. "Looking for me? Why?" "I wanted to see if you and your sister were okay, if the medicine helped." Emily shook her head slowly. "She's had a fever since last night. She's coughing a lot and can't sleep." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "She got a bit better with the medicine, but then got worse again." Ethan felt a surge of worry. "I'm sorry to hear that." "It's not your fault," Emily said with a child's simple wisdom. "You've already helped a lot." Ethan glanced at the neatly arranged dolls on the sidewalk, silent witnesses to their conversation. "Emily, I want to help more. Maybe I can do something for your sister." The girl's face lit up for a moment, then grew hesitant. "Mom doesn't like asking for help. She says we solve our own problems." "I understand," Ethan said, "but sometimes accepting help is also a way of solving problems." Emily seemed to consider this seriously. Then, as if making a big decision, she gathered her dolls and stood up. "Do you want to come to my house? Maybe you can talk to Mom yourself." Ethan wasn't expecting that invitation. He felt strangely nervous. "Are you sure? Your mom won't mind unexpected visitors." "She's home taking care of Sarah," Emily said, taking Ethan's hand naturally. "Come on, it's right here." She led him into the old apartment building. It was 3 stories tall, its paint peeling but clean, with potted plants in the small lobby. They climbed 1 flight of stairs, Emily hopping steps, Ethan following at a more measured pace. On the 2nd floor, she stopped in front of a door marked 204. "This is it," she said, turning the knob. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling out of place, as if he were intruding on a world that wasn't his. The door opened to a small but cozy living room. There were few pieces of furniture, some of them patched up, but everything was clean and organized. Children's drawings decorated one wall, and the smell of something cooking came from the tiny kitchen. "Mom, I brought someone over," Emily announced, stepping inside with her dolls. Soft footsteps came from the kitchen. "Emily, you know you shouldn't bring friends home without warning. Sarah needs—" The voice stopped abruptly when the woman walked into the living room. Ethan felt the world tilt beneath him. Standing there with a wooden spoon in her hand was Rachel. Rachel Miller. Or maybe now Rachel Santos, he wasn't sure. What he was sure of was that those same green eyes that had enchanted him 15 years ago were now staring at him in absolute shock. Rachel, his first girlfriend, his first true love. Time seemed to freeze. Neither Ethan nor Rachel could speak. Emily looked from one to the other, confused by the sudden silence. "Do you guys know each other?" she finally asked. Rachel was the first to find her voice, though she still looked like she was seeing a ghost. "Ethan," she whispered, almost as if she feared saying his name out loud would make him vanish. "Hi, Rachel," he managed, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily looked at them both, mouth open. "Wait, you really know each other?" Rachel set the spoon on the nearest table, as if she needed to free herself from any distraction. Her eyes never left Ethan's face. "Yes, honey, we met a long time ago." "A very long time," Ethan added, still dazed by the impossible coincidence. The silence returned, heavy with unspoken memories, unasked questions, half-finished stories. Emily broke the spell. "This is the guy I told you about, Mom. The one from the bank who helped me buy Sarah's medicine." She tugged at Ethan's hand, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "He wants to help take Sarah to the doctor today." Rachel looked at her daughter and then at Ethan again, trying to process the information. "You were the one who helped Emily?" "The man from the bank," Ethan nodded, unable to form more complex words. It was as though he'd gone back in time, back to being that 20-year-old who lost his words whenever Rachel entered the room. 15 years had gone by. Rachel looked different. Shorter hair, a few fine lines around her eyes, a subtle tiredness in her expression that hadn't been there before. But it was still her. Inarguably her. "I didn't know," Rachel began. Running a hand through her hair in a nervous gesture Ethan recognized instantly. "Emily told me about a kind man, but I never imagined—" "Neither did I," Ethan finished. "I never imagined Emily was your daughter." Ethan's mind spun, memories flooding in like a dam bursting. Rachel, 15 years ago. College, the tree-lined campus where they'd met. He had been 20, she 19. Ethan was an ambitious business major, not the successful executive he would become. Rachel studied literature, always carrying poetry books, always filled with ideas on how to make the world better. It was an intense love, the kind that feels destined to last forever. Ethan remembered bike rides around campus, afternoons studying together in the library, nights talking about the future while gazing at the stars. Rachel wanted to be a teacher, work with underserved children, make a difference in people's lives. He wanted to build his own empire, prove his worth to the world. They both believed they could reconcile these very different dreams. But then came the internship opportunity in another city, a chance that would change his career, a door that, if he didn't step through, would never open again. Rachel encouraged him to go, even knowing what it meant. 6 months, they told each other, just 6 months apart. The first 2 months were spent with daily letters, nightly calls, reaffirmed promises. In the 3rd month, the calls got shorter, the letters fewer. By the 4th month, the company offered him a permanent position. A choice had to be made. The last time he saw Rachel was at the train station. He had come back to get more belongings and tell her in person about the permanent position. There were tears, promises to try long distance, words of love mixed with the fear of separation. But both knew their paths were diverging. "We'll meet again," Rachel had said that day. "If it's meant to be, the universe will find a way." He returned to the new city, the new job. The letters became rare, then stopped. The phone calls, increasingly awkward, eventually ceased. Life moved on. And now, 15 years later, the universe had found a way. Ethan returned to the present to find Rachel still looking at him, as if also wading through the same river of memories. "Why were you looking for Emily?" Rachel finally asked, her voice calmer but still cautious. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "After that day at the bank, I couldn't stop thinking about her courage, the way she was so worried about her sister. I just wanted to see if everything was all right, if you needed more help." From the other side of the room came a weak cough. Rachel immediately turned toward the hallway. "That's Sarah," Emily said, tugging Ethan by the hand. "Come on, I want to show you my sister." "Emily, I'm not sure this is the best time," Rachel began, but the girl was already leading Ethan down the small corridor. "It'll just be quick, Mom. I want Sarah to see who helped us." Rachel sighed and followed them. Ethan felt uncomfortable, intruding further into this home and these lives, but he let Emily guide him. The bedroom was small, with 2 simple beds. On one bed lay a girl, younger than Emily, covered up to her neck despite the day not being cold. Her face was flushed with fever, and she was breathing with some difficulty. "Sarah, look who I brought," Emily announced excitedly, though lowering her voice. "It's Ethan, the man who gave me money for your medicine." Little Sarah looked at Ethan with big, feverish eyes. She tried to smile, but was overtaken by another bout of coughing. Ethan felt his heart tighten. The girl was clearly ill and in need of care. "Hi, Sarah," he said softly. "It's nice to meet you." Rachel came closer to the bed and placed a hand on her daughter's forehead. "She's got a fever again," she said, the worry evident in her voice. "The medicine helped the first few days, but the fever came back last night." Ethan looked at Rachel, then at Emily, then at little Sarah on the bed. It was as though the universe had conspired to bring all these pieces together, as though every step he had taken in life led him to this exact moment. "Rachel," he said, finding his voice more firmly now. "Let me help. Not for what we were in the past, but for what's happening now. I can help you." Rachel stared at him for a long moment. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes, pride battling motherly concern, distrust battling the memory of what they had shared. "Please, Mom," Emily said quietly, holding her sister's hand. "Sarah's tired." Finally, Rachel nodded. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." That single thank you held much more than gratitude for the offer. It was an acknowledgement of their shared past, an acceptance of the unexpected present, and maybe, just maybe, a small opening toward the future. Ethan looked at the two girls, then back at Rachel. 15 years ago, they had parted ways, following different paths. Now fate had brought them together again through a chance meeting with a little girl and her box of dolls. Meeting Rachel again had deeply affected Ethan. After leaving her apartment the previous day, he could barely sleep, tossing and turning as memories of the past mingled with the present reality. Seeing Rachel after so many years, discovering Emily was her daughter, meeting little Sarah, everything felt like part of a bigger plan he couldn't fully grasp. The next morning, Ethan decided to stop by their apartment before heading to the office. He had offered to help and wanted to show he was serious. He bought breakfast at a nearby bakery, fresh bread, orange juice, some fruit, and drove to the now familiar building. It was earliest just after 7 and he hesitated before knocking. Maybe it was too early. Maybe they were still asleep. But something propelled him, a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. He knocked softly, hoping not to wake anyone. To his surprise, the door opened almost immediately. Rachel was fully dressed, her face pale like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Ethan," she said, clearly surprised. "I wasn't expecting you so early." He noticed instantly that something was wrong. Rachel looked like she had been crying, and the apartment, normally neat even in its simplicity, showed signs of disarray. "What happened?" he asked, walking in without waiting for an invitation. Rachel closed the door and ran a hand through her hair in a nervous gesture. "It's Sarah. She woke up in the middle of the night with a fever. I thought it was something simple, maybe a cold, but her temperature won't go down." Ethan felt a weight in his chest. "Where is she?" "In the bedroom. I just gave her another dose of fever medicine, but it doesn't seem to be working. Honestly, she seems to be getting worse every hour." He left the bag of breakfast on the sofa and hurried to the girls' room. Sarah lay in bed, her face bright red, hair stuck to her sweaty forehead. Emily sat on the floor beside her, entertaining her dolls near her sister, as if trying to cheer her up. "Hi, Emily," Ethan said gently. The girl looked up, worry in her eyes. "Sarah doesn't want to play," Emily responded, as though that were the gravest possible diagnosis. Ethan approached the bed. Sarah opened her eyes, sensing his presence, but she seemed not to recognize him well, her feverish gaze distant. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, touching her forehead. It was scorching hot. Sarah only whimpered softly, unable to respond. Rachel appeared in the doorway. "I've been trying to lower her fever since dawn. I've given her medicine twice, but it's not helping." Ethan turned to Rachel, speaking quietly so the girls wouldn't hear. "How long has she been like this?" "It started in the middle of the night. She came to my bed saying she felt bad. By morning she was already at 102 degrees Celsius. Now it's close to 104. The worry was etched in every line of Rachel's face. Ethan realized she probably hadn't slept or eaten properly all day. "Rachel, this isn't just a regular cold. Emily needs to go to the hospital." She nodded, biting her lip. "I know, I was waiting for the medicine to work, but..." Her voice cracked. "I don't have a car, and on a Tuesday afternoon it'll take forever to get a cab or bus to the hospital." "I'll drive you," Ethan said without hesitation. "Right now." Rachel looked relieved and worried at the same time. "Sarah is staying home today. We need to take her too." "That's no problem. My car is downstairs." In minutes, they were ready. Rachel packed a small backpack with a few essentials, while Ethan wrapped Sarah in a blanket. She was too hot, but she was shivering as if cold. "We're going to take you somewhere they'll help you feel better," he said, picking her up. Sarah was too weak to respond. Emily walked beside him, carrying 2 dolls, one for her, one for her sister. They descended the stairs in tense silence. The rain was still falling, now heavier. Ethan shielded Sarah as much as he could while Rachel, holding Emily's hand, ran to the car. Traffic was heavy due to the rain, but Ethan found alternate routes. Throughout the drive, he kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Sarah, who lay in her mother's lap in the back seat. Rachel dabbed a damp cloth on her forehead, murmuring comforting words. "How much farther?" Emily asked from the passenger seat, where Ethan had placed her so Rachel could stay with Sarah in the back. "Not much," he said, trying to sound calm despite the growing anxiety. When they finally arrived at the hospital, Ethan parked as close as possible to the emergency entrance. He scooped Sarah up in his arms again and ran inside, with Rachel and Emily following. The emergency room reception was crowded, as always, people coughing, kids crying, adults with expressions of pain or boredom. Ethan walked straight to the triage desk, ignoring the line. "Please," he said to the nurse, "this little girl has had a very high fever since last night and isn't responding to medication." The nurse looked at Sarah and immediately recognized the severity. She asked Rachel a few quick questions about symptoms, measured Sarah's temperature, and called another colleague. "We'll take her inside right away," she said, already calling a doctor over the radio. Rachel looked at Ethan, fear clear in her eyes. "Go with her," he said. "I'll stay here with Emily." She hesitated for a moment, torn between her 2 daughters. "Go on, Mom," Emily said, showing surprising maturity for her age. "I'll stay with Ethan." Rachel nodded and followed the nurse, who was already wheeling Sarah away. Ethan held Emily's hand and found some empty chairs where they could wait. The girl sat next to him, dolls in her lap, quiet and watchful. The minutes dragged, becoming an hour, then 2. Emily eventually fell asleep, her head resting on Ethan's arm. He stayed alert, eyes fixed on the door where Rachel and Sarah had disappeared. Finally, after almost 3 hours, Rachel emerged. She looked exhausted, but slightly less tense than before. "How is she?" Ethan asked immediately, trying not to wake Emily. Rachel sat next to him, running her hand over her older daughter's hair. "They're admitting her," she said quietly. "It's a severe bacterial infection. They think it started as untreated tonsillitis that spread. They're giving her strong IV antibiotics." "Is she going to be okay?" Ethan asked, his heart tight. Rachel nodded slowly. "The doctor says yes. She's strong and we caught it in time, but..." Her voice faltered. "She'll need to stay for at least 2 days. Ethan absorbed the information, thinking about practicalities. "You'll need to stay with her," he said. "I can take Emily home and stay with her." Rachel looked at him, surprise evident on her tired face. "You'd do that?" "Of course." She took a deep breath as though summoning courage. "No. Thank you, but Emily wouldn't be comfortable without either of us, especially with her sister sick. I need to figure something else out." Ethan nodded, respecting her decision. "Then we'll all stay. I can arrange beds for us here at the hospital. I have some contacts." Rachel looked as though she was about to protest, but then she glanced at the sleeping Emily and at Ethan, and something in her eyes changed. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't have a simple answer. Was it because of their shared past? Because of the connection he'd felt with Emily from the first moment? Because of the family he never imagined finding? "Because you matter to me," he replied simply. Rachel didn't say anything else, but tears filled her eyes. An hour later, thanks to Ethan's contacts, they were settled in a private room where Sarah slept, hooked up to monitors and an IV. A recliner had been brought in for Rachel, and Ethan improvised a bed for Emily with extra blankets. It was already night when Emily finally fell asleep again, this time next to her sister on the hospital bed, despite the nurse's recommendations against it. Rachel slipped out quietly to the hallway, and Ethan followed. Outside, under the hospital's harsh fluorescent lights, she looked particularly vulnerable. She was no longer the confident young woman he had known in college, nor the determined mother he'd met the day before. She was just a tired woman, carrying a huge burden alone. "Thank you," she said, leaning against the wall. "For all this? There's no need to thank me." Silence fell between them again, but it was different from before. There was openness now, an invitation. "I never imagined things turning out like this," Rachel finally said, looking at her own hands. "When we dreamed about the future back then, none of this was part of the plan." Ethan nodded, leaving room for her to continue. "I met David 3 years after we broke up," she went on. "He was a teacher, just like I wanted to be. He seemed stable, reliable. We got married quickly. Emily was born a year later." She took a deep breath, as though gathering strength for the next part. "Things were good at first, or at least I thought they were. When I got pregnant with Sarah, something changed. David became distant, irritable. I thought it was just the stress of a second child." Rachel paused, her gaze lost in memory. 3 weeks after Sarah was born, he went out to buy diapers and never came back. He left a note saying he couldn't take it anymore, that it wasn't the life he wanted. Ethan felt a surge of anger at this man he didn't even know. In the beginning, it was a shock. Then came the practical desperation. Bills, rent, 2 little girls. I had to quit my job at the school because I had no one to watch them. I tried giving private lessons at home for a while, but it got harder and harder. The tears started to fall silently. The worst part isn't the financial hardship, you know? It's the fear. Constant fear of not being able to protect them, of failing as a mother, of them getting sick like Emily just did and me not being able to do anything. Her voice broke, and her shoulders began to shake with long, contained sobs. Ethan said nothing. No words could ease that pain, that weight. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her arm, a simple gesture showing he was there. Rachel cried quietly, tears from years of solitary struggle, sleepless nights of worry, skipped meals so her daughters could eat. She did not cry out of weakness, but from the relief of finally sharing the burden. When her tears subsided, she did not shrug off Ethan's touch. They stood there, side by side in the hospital hallway, connected by something beyond words. "I pulled away from everyone," Rachel finally said, her voice steadier now. "From friends, family. It was too hard to explain, to ask for help, to see pity in people's eyes. I ended up distancing myself even from who I was, from my dreams." Ethan listened intently, recognizing that this moment of vulnerability was a gift of trust. "My girls are everything to me now. I'd do anything for them. That's why it was so hard. Accepting your help. I'm not used to it. I don't know how anymore." "You don't have to do it alone," Ethan finally said, his first words since she began talking. "Not now." Rachel looked at him, really looked, as though seeing him for the first time since they'd reconnected. There was something new in her eyes, not just gratitude, not reliving the past, but a possibility. "Let's go back inside," she said gently. "I want to be there when Emily wakes up." Ethan nodded, holding the door open for her. The silence between them held no tension or unanswered questions now, just mutual understanding, a shared present, and maybe, just maybe, the first glimpse of a possible future. After 3 days in the hospital, Sarah was finally discharged. The doctor explained that the infection was under control, but she would need to continue treatment at home for at least a week. He handed Rachel a prescription for antibiotics and care instructions. "She needs plenty of rest and must take all her medications on schedule," the doctor said as he signed the discharge papers. "And if the fever comes back, don't hesitate to return immediately." Rachel nodded, holding the papers carefully as though they were a treasure. She looked exhausted, but there was evident relief in her face. Next to her, Emily practically jumped with excitement at the news they would finally be returning home. Ethan, who had taken time off work during those days to stay with them in the hospital, offered to drive them. On the way, he made a quick stop at a pharmacy to buy the prescribed medicines. Rachel tried to protest when he paid, but Ethan just smiled and tucked the receipt in his pocket without making a show of it. Once they reached the apartment, Sarah was nearly asleep in the back seat, still weak from her hospital stay. Ethan carefully lifted her and carried her upstairs, while Rachel and Emily followed with the few items they had taken to the hospital. The apartment was exactly as they had left it, showing signs of their rushed exit. Ethan laid Sarah gently on the bed, arranging the pillows so she'd be comfortable. The little girl opened her eyes briefly, smiling at him before drifting off again. Rachel started organizing the medications in the kitchen, separating them by schedule. Emily pulled Ethan by the hand into the living room, showing him the drawings she had made at the hospital to decorate her sister's room. "I want to make more," she said, already grabbing her colored pencils, "so everything's pretty when she wakes up." Ethan stayed for a while, helping Emily with her drawings, checking if Rachel needed anything. By the time he finally said goodbye, it was already night. In the hallway of the building, Rachel walked him to the stairwell. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Ethan replied. There was something about that moment that felt too important for more words. The next morning, Ethan arrived with grocery bags. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, milk, cereal, basic items he knew would help. He was greeted by Emily, who opened the door with a huge smile. "You came back," she exclaimed, as if it were a wonderful surprise. Rachel emerged from the kitchen, clearly taken aback. When she saw the bags, her expression revealed a momentary conflict between pride and gratitude. Gratitude won. "Thank you," she said simply, helping him put things away. "How's Sarah?" Ethan asked. "Better. She slept all night. She's having breakfast now." Over that next week, Ethan established a pattern, stopping by after work, always bringing something. Sometimes groceries, sometimes a children's book, other times just his presence. He never announced he was coming, never made a big deal of his help. He was simply there. Rachel, initially tense about his visits, gradually began to relax. Sometimes, when Ethan arrived, he found her in the kitchen, cooking a simple meal. The smell of home-cooked food returned to fill the small apartment. Once, he surprised her humming a tune while doing the dishes. A simple sound that revealed so much. Rachel rarely expressed her thanks in words. They were in small gestures. A cup of coffee made just the way he liked. A pillow placed where he usually sat on the couch. A lingering look when she thought he wasn't watching. Sarah recovered day by day. Soon she was sitting in the living room drawing with Emily, still quieter than her sister, but with bright eyes whenever Ethan walked in. Emily, in turn, blossomed with the re-established routine. Her smiles, already frequent, became constant. She waited for Ethan's visits with palpable anticipation, always with new stories to tell or drawings to show. One particularly sunny afternoon, Ethan arrived to find the apartment flooded with light. The curtains were open, and there were simple wildflowers in a cup on the table, probably picked by Emily from some neighborhood planter. "Ethan," Emily ran to greet him as soon as he knocked. "Look what I made today." She held up a colorful drawing where 3 figures holding hands, a big one and 2 smaller ones, stood under a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she explained unnecessarily. "Me, Sarah, and Mom." Ethan smiled, admiring the drawing. Then he noticed another figure in the corner of the paper. "And who's that?" he asked, pointing. Emily grinned even wider. "That's you, silly. Except you're arriving. You're always arriving to visit us." The simple observation touched Ethan more deeply than he expected. He was the one always arriving, but maybe he could just be the one who stayed. That afternoon, instead of just sitting and listening to Emily's stories, Ethan actively joined the girls. He sat on the living room floor, drew with them, helped Sarah, still a bit weak, color within the lines. When Rachel came out of the bedroom, where she had been changing the sheets, she stopped at the doorway for a moment, watching the scene. There was something different in the air, as though the apartment, once just a place to live, had turned into a home again. Ethan's visits became part of the routine. They were no longer exceptions, but something expected, welcomed. The girls began counting the hours until he arrived. Rachel left the door unlocked, knowing exactly when he would come. Small rituals formed, Emily showing him that day's drawings, Sarah smiling shyly from the corner of the room, Rachel offering a simple drink or snack. Ethan no longer needed an excuse to show up. He didn't have to bring gifts or groceries. His presence was enough. He helped Emily with her dolls, listened to her stories, played simple games with Sarah. It was a peaceful coexistence with no demands, no expectations beyond the present moment. One Friday, after nearly 2 weeks of this new routine, Ethan prepared to leave a bit earlier than usual. He had a work commitment the next day, a Saturday, and needed to prepare. "Will you come tomorrow too?" Emily asked, holding the building's gate as he was leaving. There was a simple, genuine anticipation in her eyes. She clearly cared about his answer, but would accept it no matter what. Ethan looked at her, then at the building where he knew Rachel and Sarah were waiting. Something shifted inside him at that moment, a recognition of something he already knew but was only now putting into words. "If you want me to come, I will," he answered, smiling. Emily nodded seriously, as though they had sealed an important agreement. "I do," she said simply. They said goodbye right there, at the building's entrance. There were no grand words, no elaborate promises, just a quiet agreement, a mutual understanding that something was forming between them, not just between Ethan and Emily, but between Ethan and that little family that, against all odds, had found its way to him. As he walked back to his car, Ethan felt a lightness he had not experienced in years. He glanced back one more time, seeing Emily still at the gate, waving above her. On the second-floor window, the silhouettes of Rachel and Sarah also watched. 3 different figures, united not by blood, but by the bond that now extended to include him. A family in the making, quietly, with eyes that said everything. A month passed since Sarah's return from the hospital. Fall advanced, painting the neighborhood trees in golden and red tones. The nights grew longer, and the routine established between Ethan and Rachel's family took on solidity, like a plant that had overcome its fragile seedling stage and was now growing deep roots. Ethan no longer needed reasons to visit. His car parked in front of the building had become a familiar sight to the neighbors. 3 or 4 times a week, he arrived after work, sometimes with small surprises in his pockets, a chocolate bar, a children's book, a little toy, but often just bringing his presence, which was gift enough. On that Wednesday afternoon, Ethan arrived to find Emily and Sarah drawing at the dining table. A delicious aroma came from the kitchen, where Rachel was cooking a simple stew. She smiled when she saw him come in, a smile more open, more confident than before. "I got here at the right time," Ethan said, inhaling the aroma. "You always do," Rachel replied, stirring the pot. The girls ran to greet him, each holding up a drawing to show off. Sarah, fully recovered from the infection, had gone back to being the quiet but observant child she was before, while Emily was still the chatterbox who filled every silence with stories. After dinner, when the girls were already in their room getting ready for bed, Ethan helped Rachel wash the dishes. It was a silent dance they had perfected. She washed, he dried, and the world seemed to revolve at just the right pace during those moments. "Rachel," Ethan said, putting the last plate in the cabinet, "can I talk to you about something?" She dried her hands on a dish towel and turned to him, a slight tension in her shoulders as though she expected bad news. "Sure." Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about your situation and about you all." Rachel crossed her arms, an automatic defensive posture. "What about us? I want to help in a more concrete way, not just bringing groceries or staying with the girls." She eyed him warily. "What do you mean?" Ethan took a deep breath. He knew he was stepping into sensitive territory, that Rachel's pride was one of the few things she'd managed to preserve through so many hardships. "I want to help you get back on your feet, not as charity, but as a partnership." Rachel did not answer right away. Her eyes searched Ethan's face, looking for any hint of pity or condescension. Finding none, she relaxed a bit. "What kind of partnership?" Ethan pulled something from his coat pocket, a rectangular card bearing the logo of a large supermarket chain. "To start with, it's a supermarket credit card. I set a monthly limit on it, enough for the basic needs of the 3 of you." Rachel looked at the card as though it were something strange, potentially dangerous. She did not take it. "Ethan, I know what you're going to say," he interrupted gently. "That you can't accept, that you'll figure out a way, that you've done it alone for so long. And I admire your strength, Rachel. I truly do. But sometimes the bravest thing isn't refusing help, it's accepting it. She kept looking at the card, conflict visible on her face. I don't want to owe anyone, she finally said, her voice low. You don't owe me anything, Ethan answered, and this isn't a loan, not something to pay back. It's just a bridge for you to cross until you get to where you need to be. Slowly, Rachel extended her hand and took the card. Her fingers trembled slightly. Thank you, she said so quietly Ethan almost didn't hear. But this is temporary, until I find a job. Ethan nodded, respecting that condition. Of course. That night marked a subtle but significant change. In the following days, when Ethan visited, he noticed small signs of a little more abundance. Fresh fruit in the bowl, some new books on the girl's shelf, a new pair of shoes that Sarah wore proudly. Rachel used the card sparingly, only for essentials, but even so, the difference was noticeable. A week after that conversation, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. He found Rachel alone in the apartment. The girls were at school. She seemed nervous, sorting through papers on the dining table. Is everything okay? He asked, concerned. Rachel sighed. I'm trying to organize my resume. The public school nearby is hiring assistants for the library, but it's been so long since I've had a formal job that I don't know where to start. Ethan sat next to her, looking at the papers. Can I help? Rachel hesitated, then pushed the papers toward him. Please. They spent the afternoon rebuilding her resume. Rachel had been a teacher for a few years before Emily was born, held a college degree in literature, and had experience tutoring. As she talked about her professional past, Ethan saw a spark in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. You really love teaching, don't you? He asked, watching her. Always have, Rachel confessed. There's something magical about watching someone learn, about being part of that process. When they finished, Rachel seemed more confident. They agreed she would submit the resume the next day at the public school. But when Ethan returned to his office that night, he couldn't stop thinking. The passion in Rachel's eyes when she spoke of teaching had ignited an idea in his mind. The next morning, instead of heading straight to his scheduled meeting, Ethan took a small detour. He knew the director of Barrett Academy, a well-regarded private school in the city, quite well. Years ago, his company had funded the renovation of the institution's library, and since then they had kept a cordial relationship. The conversation was brief, but fruitful. When he left the director's office, Ethan had a smile on his face and a card in his hand. That night, he arrived at Rachel's apartment later than usual. The girls were already in pajamas, listening to a story Rachel was reading in the living room. When he walked in, Emily ran to hug him but immediately noticed his expression. You look different, she observed, always keen. Did something good happen? Maybe, Ethan replied, glancing at Rachel. Could I speak with you for a moment, in private? Rachel frowned but nodded. Girls, go brush your teeth and head to bed. I'll be there soon to finish the story. Once they had left, Rachel turned to Ethan. What happened? I have something for you, he said, handing her an envelope. It's not exactly what you were looking for, but it might be even better. Rachel opened it cautiously. Inside was an official letter on Barrett Academy letterhead. Her eyes scanned the text, and then they widened. This is an invitation for an interview, Ethan confirmed, for a literature assistant teacher position. It's not the public library, it's something much better. Rachel held the letter as though it were made of glass. Barrett Academy, but that's one of the best schools in the city. How did you... I know the director, Ethan explained simply. I told him about you, your background, your experience. He was interested. The rest is up to you. Up to the interview. I'm not sure I'm ready, Rachel murmured, fear creeping into her voice. It's been so long. Ethan moved closer and touched her arm gently. You're more than ready. I saw your face when you spoke about teaching. You were born for this, Rachel. At that moment, Emily peeked in from the bedroom door. Mom, are you crying? Rachel hadn't realized the silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly. It's nothing, sweetheart, they're happy tears. Happy tears, Emily repeated, confused. How can tears be happy? Rachel smiled, one that lit up her entire face. Sometimes we cry because we're so happy that happiness doesn't fit inside us. It has to come out somehow. Emily considered that seriously, then smiled back. So you're really happy? I am, Rachel confirmed, looking at Ethan with a gratitude beyond words. Very happy. In the days leading up to the interview, Rachel swung between confidence and anxiety. Ethan often found her rereading her old literature books, taking notes, and preparing as though for the most important exam of her life. The night before the interview, he arrived with a gift. You shouldn't have, Rachel said as she opened the package to find a simple but elegant blazer. It's just for good luck, Ethan replied, though you don't need luck, you only need to be yourself. The morning of the interview dawned clear, the sunshine mild. Ethan had offered to watch the girls after school so Rachel could take her time. As she left the apartment, wearing the new blazer and holding her resume, she looked like a stronger version of herself, as if she had reconnected with the confident woman she once was. The hours dragged for Ethan, who tried to work but couldn't concentrate. At 3 in the afternoon, he picked up the girls from school as arranged. Emily was anxious, asking every minute if her mother had called. Sarah, quieter, just clung to her favorite doll, as if that could influence the outcome. It was almost evening when they heard footsteps on the stairs. All three, Ethan and the girls, were in the living room, pretending to watch a cartoon but clearly just waiting. When the door opened, Rachel walked in with an unreadable expression. "Mom," Emily exclaimed, running to her. "What happened? Did you get it?" Rachel looked at her daughter, then at Sarah, who had approached timidly, and finally at Ethan, who waited a few steps away, trying not to show his own anxiety. A slow smile started forming on Rachel's lips, small at first, then growing until it lit up her entire face. "I got it," she said simply. The reaction was immediate. Emily squealed with joy, jumping around the room. Sarah, even without fully understanding, smiled at her mother's happiness. And Ethan? Ethan felt something expand inside him, a feeling of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Rachel explained she would start the following week, with hours matching the girls' school schedule. The salary was good, better than she expected, and there was room for growth. The director said he was impressed, she recounted, preparing hot chocolate for everyone to celebrate. He said my knowledge of classic literature was exceptional, and he especially liked my idea for a reading club for younger students. There was something new in Rachel's movements, a confidence, a certainty that hadn't been there before. She moved around the kitchen lightly, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Later that night, when the girls finally went to bed, exhausted from the day's excitement, Rachel and Ethan sat alone in the apartment's small balcony. The night sky was clear, the city sounds seeming distant as if they couldn't intrude on that moment. "Thank you," Rachel said, breaking the silence. "Not just for the opportunity, but for believing I could do it." Ethan shook his head. "All I did was open a door. You walked through it on your own." "Still." Rachel looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You know what I felt today sitting in that interview room? For the first time in years, I felt in control of my own future again. Like I wasn't just reacting to life, but making active choices." "That's how it should be," Ethan replied softly. Rachel smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Emily noticed. "You know, when I got home after I told the news, she hugged me and whispered, 'Mom, your smile is back.' Like my smile had been lost all this time." "Kids notice things adults sometimes ignore," Ethan remarked. They fell silent for a moment, enjoying the evening, the achievement, the subtle but profound change that was occurring. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Rachel asked, almost to herself. "One piece being put back in place, in a much bigger puzzle." Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The new job was not just employment, it was a statement of worth. A first step on a road of recovery, not just financially but emotionally. "One step at a time," he said. "No rush." Rachel looked back inside the apartment, where her daughters slept peacefully, then at Ethan. There was a new determination in her eyes. "One step at a time," she repeated, "but now I know I'm walking in the right direction." Mornings at Rachel's place developed a new rhythm. They were no longer marked by the anxiety of what might come, but by the comfortable pace of a routine that finally made sense. At 6:30 a.m., the alarm rang. Rachel got up first, made breakfast while the girls slowly woke up. The smell of toast and coffee filled the small apartment, replacing the tense silence of before with a cheerful anticipation of the day ahead. Ethan arrived at 7:15, punctual as clockwork. He no longer had to knock. He had his own key now, a small symbol of trust Rachel had given him without fuss. "Good morning," he'd say, entering the kitchen where all three were already having breakfast. Emily would always greet him enthusiastically, Sarah with a shy smile, and Rachel with a look that spoke volumes beyond words. Rachel's new job at Barrett Academy provided financial stability, but more importantly, it gave her back a sense of purpose. She left at 7:30, well dressed in simple yet elegant clothes, with a confidence that grew each day. Ethan stayed with the girls, taking them to their respective schools. For Emily, the change was transformative. After years of irregular attendance, she now went to school daily, proudly wearing the uniform Rachel was able to buy with her first paycheck. In the first week, Ethan found her awake at 5 in the morning, uniform already on, backpack packed, waiting eagerly on the couch. "I'm ready," she announced when he finally came in, hours later. "I can see that," Ethan replied, smiling, "but we still have time. Want to show me what you're taking today?" Emily opened her backpack reverently. Inside, besides neatly arranged notebooks and pencils, was a book Ethan had given her, a collection of illustrated children's stories. "I'm going to show it to my teacher," she explained. "She said she likes to see what we read at home." That small gesture, a child eager to share a book, had deep significance. Emily wasn't just attending school now, she belonged there, forming bonds, finding her place in the world of learning. Their walk to the school became a special ritual. Ethan would park 2 blocks away, and they would walk the rest, hand in hand. During those 15 minutes, Emily would chatter non-stop about her classmates, her classes, the stories she heard, the questions that popped into her curious mind. "Why is the sky blue, Ethan?" she asked one morning, looking up. "It's because of the sunlight," he explained. "The white sunlight has all the colors mixed, but as it passes through the air, the blue waves scatter more." Emily listened intently, taking in every word. Sometimes she asked more questions, other times she just nodded, processing the information. Ethan learned to adapt his explanations, never too simple to underestimate her, nor so complex as to confuse her. At the school door, their farewell always followed the same pattern. Emily adjusted her backpack, looked at Ethan seriously, and said, "Thanks for bringing me." "My pleasure," he would reply. A quick hug, and she would run off to meet her friends, turning around one last time to wave before going in. For Sarah, the changes were also significant. At 4 years old, she was still too young for regular school, but Ethan found an excellent community daycare nearby. At first, she cried when separating from her mom and sister, clinging to Ethan's leg when he tried to drop her off. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You won't be alone," he reassured her, crouching to her level. "You'll meet other kids, make friends, play, learn new things, and at the end of the day, I'll come back for you, always." That word, always, seemed to work like magic. Sarah took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and walked into daycare with hesitant steps. Over time, the tears disappeared, replaced by a timid smile when she saw her friends. For Rachel, this arrangement brought more than practical relief. It was a chance to rediscover herself as a professional and a woman, not just a mother. For the first time in years, she had a few hours to herself, to develop her work without the constant pressure of single-handedly caring for her daughters. "How was your day?" Ethan would ask each afternoon, meeting her and the girls back at the small apartment. Rachel would recount her classes, her students, the challenges and joys of being back in the classroom. Her eyes lit up when she talked about a student who finally grasped a difficult concept or a reading project she was organizing. Evenings settled into their own pattern. While Rachel made dinner, Ethan helped Emily with homework and played with Sarah. After the shared meal, there was always time for stories, games, or simple conversations in the small living room. One night, Emily asked something that caught the adults by surprise. "Ethan, you knew my mom when you were young, right?" Ethan and Rachel exchanged a quick glance. They hadn't hidden from the girls that they knew each other in the past, but they hadn't shared details either. "Yes," Ethan replied carefully. "We met in college." "Were you friends?" Emily continued, her eyes full of curiosity. Another glance exchanged, a hesitation. "We were close," Rachel said, choosing her words. "Very close." Emily seemed satisfied and went back to her drawing, but that simple question opened a door both had kept closed until then. Later, when the girls were asleep, Rachel and Ethan sat on the small balcony. The nights were cooler now, and Rachel brought out a blanket they shared, shoulders lightly touching. "Emily's observant," Ethan commented. "She always has been," Rachel agreed. Even when she was really little, she'd notice things no one else did. The silence that followed was comfortable, full of unspoken meanings. After so many weeks side by side in daily tasks, they had developed their own language, made of looks, subtle gestures, and pauses. "I guess we never really talked about that time," Rachel finally said. "About us," Ethan nodded. "I think we were both too busy with the present to revisit the past." "But the past is always there, right? It's part of who we are." The moon was visible among scattered clouds, casting gentle shadows on the balcony. Ethan looked at Rachel, not as he saw her now, a dedicated mother rebuilding her life, but as the young woman he'd known so long ago, full of dreams and ideals. "Remember that cafe near campus?" he asked, a smile forming at the corners of his mouth. Rachel laughed softly. "How could I forget? We spent hours there pretending to study." "Pretending?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, feigning offense. "I really did study. For the first 15 minutes, maybe," she teased. "Then you'd look at me over your book, thinking I didn't notice." "And you did notice." "Always." That simple conversation opened the way for others. Gradually, night after night, they reconnected the threads of the past. They talked about eccentric professors, about theories they were passionate about plans they'd made. They avoided discussing the breakup, the end. Those topics would come with time. By day, they kept to the established routine. Ethan took Emily to school, then Sarah to daycare, and worked remotely at the apartment for a few hours before picking them up. Rachel flourished in her new job, growing more confident with every class she taught. The apartment, once marked by scarcity, gained small touches of comfort: a plant in the window, new curtains, a shelf for the books that were accumulating. These weren't luxuries, just signs that life was no longer mere survival but something more. "This is more than I ever dreamed of having again," Rachel remarked one night as the four of them finished a board game. "What is?" Ethan asked. Rachel looked at her daughters, laughing and arguing over who would put away the pieces, then back at Ethan. "A family," she said simply. That word hovered in the air, laden with possibilities. Ethan didn't respond, but his gaze said it all. In that silent moment, both recognized that what they had built together went deeper than any label. He wasn't just a friend helping out in tough times. He was more, much more, Fall continued, painting the neighborhood trees red and gold. The afternoons grew shorter, the air cooler. On one particularly pleasant Saturday, when the girls had been invited to a birthday party at a classmate's house, Rachel and Ethan found themselves with a rare moment of peace, just for the two of them. The small balcony of the apartment had become their refuge. A simple space, just two time-worn chairs and a little table between them. But somehow it felt apart from the rest of the world. That was where they talked when the girls were asleep, where they shared thoughts that didn't fit into the daily routine. Rachel made coffee, strong just as Ethan liked it, in two faded mugs that had survived the tough years. She handed him one and sat in the chair beside him, pulling on a light cardigan over her shoulders. The late afternoon sun bathed the balcony in a golden, almost dreamlike light. "The girls must be having fun," Ethan said, watching children play on the sidewalks below. "Especially Emily," Rachel replied, smiling. "She's never had many chances to go to birthday parties. She was so excited she barely slept." They lapsed into silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. Below them, a radio played soft music in a neighbor's apartment. In the distance, they heard dogs barking and the occasional car passing by. Everyday sounds that somehow made the moment even more special. "It's strange," Rachel finally said, staring at the mug in her hands. "How life twists and turns. If someone had told me a few months ago we'd be sitting here like this." "I know," Ethan agreed. "Sometimes it feels like it was all arranged somehow, like all the pieces were just waiting to come together at the right moment." Rachel nodded, thoughtful. A light breeze lifted a few strands of her hair around her face, and she brushed them aside absently. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "There's something I never told you. About us. About what happened." He looked at her curiously. In the past few weeks, they had talked a lot about their shared past, but always in a light-hearted way, recalling happy memories, avoiding the painful end. "What is it?" he asked, sensing she was about to reveal something important. Rachel took a deep breath, as if gathering courage, her gaze fixed on a distant point, beyond the balcony, beyond the present. "My mother never liked you," she finally said. "She thought you weren't good enough for me. She made me end it all. I was young and depended on her for everything, and I didn't have the courage to fight." The words hung in the air. Ethan felt something shift inside him, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place after years of being forced in the wrong spot. "Your mother," he repeated, trying to process what he'd just heard. Rachel nodded, turning to face him. "When you got that job offer in another city, she saw the perfect chance. She said if I truly loved you, I'd let you go without strings, that it was selfish to hold you back in a long-distance relationship when you were just starting your career, that I'd be a burden, an obstacle." Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Memories flooded back. The final meeting at the train station, the promises of maintaining contact, the letters and phone calls that gradually ceased. "This changes everything for me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you just forgot about me, that you moved on so easily while I—" He left the sentence unfinished, but Rachel understood. She saw in his eyes the blend of old pain and late understanding. A sad smile formed on her lips. Without a word, she stood up and went inside the apartment. Ethan heard her soft footsteps, the sound of a cabinet opening. When she returned, she carried a small, worn wooden box in her hands. Rachel sat down again and opened the box. She took out a yellowed envelope, its corners creased from being handled so often. She handed it to Ethan with almost reverent care. "What's this?" he asked, taking it carefully. "Open it," was all she said. Gingerly, as though handling a fragile relic, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a piece of paper, also yellowed with age. As he unfolded it, he immediately recognized his own handwriting, young, impulsive, but unmistakably his. It was a note he had written to Rachel before leaving. He read his own words, penned 15 years earlier, feeling a mix of emotions he could barely name. "No matter how long it takes, I'll be waiting for you. There will always be a place for us, even if it's another time, another life. Someday, somehow, we'll find our way back to each other. With all my love, Ethan." He lifted his eyes from the paper, meeting Rachel's gaze. "I wrote this thinking you never wanted to answer," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I waited for you to come back," she replied softly, "thinking you'd left me behind." The silence that followed had a different weight, not of unspoken things, but of truths finally revealed. Ethan looked at the note in his hands, then at Rachel. All the lost time, the separate paths they had walked, now seemed part of a bigger plan that had brought them right here, right now. "All these years," he began, not sure how to express what he felt. "I know," Rachel said, sparing him from trying to verbalize what both understood. "But maybe we needed that time. Maybe we weren't ready before." Ethan thought about everything that had happened since then, his professional success, his personal loneliness, the emptiness no achievement could fill. He thought of Rachel, her struggles, her daughters, the strength she had developed through hardship. "Now we are," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Rachel smiled, a smile unlike any she had given him before, not sad or nostalgic, but full present. "Now we are," she agreed. Their hands met over the little table, a simple touch without urgency. There was no need for grand gestures or elaborate declarations. Time had taught them that true love does not require spectacle. They remained there on the tiny balcony as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. They did not talk about the future or make promises. They didn't have to. In the comfortable silence they shared, everything they needed to know was there, that after all the detours, chances, and improbable coincidences, they had found their way back to each other. And this time, nothing would separate them. Winter arrived, softening the outlines of the city with a fine layer of snow. The neighborhood streets gained a silvery glow in the mornings, and twilight seemed to come earlier, with the sun setting behind old buildings in a pale-colored show. For Ethan, time moved differently now. Days were no longer measured by work appointments or business goals, but by small shared moments. Breakfast with the girls before school, text messages exchanged with Rachel during the day, bedtime stories, balcony chats under blankets. On a particularly cold Sunday afternoon, the four of them were gathered in the living room. Rachel was grading her students' work, focused yet relaxed, occasionally commenting on something funny or interesting she found. Sarah was quietly playing with her dolls on the rug, whispering stories only she fully understood. Ethan was helping Emily with a science project for school, a mini solar system made of styrofoam balls and paint. "Saturn is my favorite planet," Emily declared, carefully painting the rings with a mix of silver and white. "It has rings, like it's always marrying the universe." Ethan smiled at the analogy. "That's a poetic way of seeing it." "My teacher said poetry is when you say regular things in a different way," Emily explained with the seriousness of someone sharing a great secret. "I like poetry." "I can see that," Ethan replied, helping her adjust the wire that would hold the planets. They worked in harmony for almost an hour. The project took shape, each planet finding its place in the little universe they were building together. From the kitchen table, Rachel watched them discreetly, a small smile on her lips. When they finished, Emily contemplated the model with satisfaction. The planets spun gently when she blew on them, a miniature cosmic ballet. "It's perfect," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. "My teacher is going to love it." Ethan began cleaning up, washing brushes, closing paint jars. Emily, however, didn't move. She seemed thoughtful, almost hesitant. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her expression. "Yes," she answered quickly. "It's just—" She bit her lip, looking at the floor. "Just what?" Ethan encouraged gently. Emily took a deep breath and stood up. "Wait here," she said, and ran to the bedroom she shared with her sister. Rachel raised her eyes from the papers, curious. Ethan shrugged, equally intrigued. Sarah remained in her own doll world, unaware of the small tension building. A few minutes later, Emily returned. In her hands, she held a sheet of paper carefully, as though it were fragile and precious. She stopped in front of Ethan, took another deep breath and handed it to him. "I made this for you," she said, her voice a mix of pride and nervousness. "At school." Ethan took the paper curiously. It was a drawing done in colored pencil, the kind that keeps children busy during art class. But there was something different about it, a care in the details, a clear intention in what it wanted to say. In the drawing, 4 stick figures held hands under a vibrant blue sky. A big yellow sun smiled from the top right corner. It was easy to identify them. Emily, with brown hair and a colorful dress. Sarah, smaller, holding a doll in her free hand. Rachel, with shoulder-length hair and a book under her arm. And Ethan, the tallest, wearing what looked like his favorite blue shirt. All of them were smiling, simple curved lines that somehow conveyed genuine happiness. They stood on what appeared to be green grass, with a few colorful flowers scattered around, and a simple house in the background, not the apartment they lived in, but an idealized home, complete with a chimney puffing swirls of smoke and large windows. In the center of the picture, written in big, colorful letters, each letter a different hue, was the message, "Thank you for showing up in our life." Ethan felt something unexpected happen. A lump formed in his throat, and his eyes stung. He blinked several times, trying to hold back the emotion that caught him off guard. He held the paper as though it were a rare jewel, with reverence and care. "Emily," he began to, but his voice failed him. The girl watched him, searching for his reaction. "Did you like it?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "Like it," Ethan repeated, finally finding words. "Emily, this is the most beautiful present anyone has ever given me." Her face lit up with a radiant smile. "Really?" "Absolutely," he confirmed. "Can I give you a hug?" In response, Emily threw herself into his arms with her usual impulsiveness. Ethan hugged her tightly, feeling a wave of affection deeper than anything he had felt before. "My teacher asked us to draw our family," Emily explained, her voice muffled against his chest. "Everyone else drew dads, moms, siblings, dogs. I drew you too, because you're part of our family now, right?" Ethan looked over Emily's head to find Rachel's eyes. She had set aside her grading and was watching them, tears glistening, a gentle smile on her lips. "Yes," he answered, his voice steady despite the emotion. "I'm part of your family now, if you'll have me." "We want you," Emily declared. She looked at her sister. "Right, Sarah?" Sarah raised her eyes from her dolls, observing the scene with her usual seriousness. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes," she said in her small voice. "Ethan is family." The simplicity of her statement, coming from the quieter of the sisters, carried a special weight. Rachel rose and approached, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly, only for her to hear. "For what?" Rachel asked. "For letting me be part of this," he replied, looking at the girls, at the simple but cozy apartment, at the life they had built together over these past months. Rachel smiled, understanding what he didn't need to say. Words were unnecessary between them now. "Let's hang the drawing," Emily exclaimed, jumping with excitement. "So everyone can see it." Ethan nodded, standing up with the picture in hand. "Where do you think it should go?" Emily looked around, thinking hard, searching for the perfect spot. Her eyes landed on a small space on the living room wall, beside a shelf where Rachel kept little treasures, a seashell found on a rare beach trip, a handmade candle never lit because it was too pretty, a small vase of dried flowers. "Right there," Emily pointed, "near Mum's special things." Rachel went to get some tape, and together they hung the drawing on the wall. It was just a simple piece of paper with childish outlines, but somehow it transformed the space. It was as though that little corner of the home now radiated something special, a feeling that would keep the place warm even on the coldest days. Ethan stepped back to admire the drawing. In that moment, he felt something he had been unconsciously seeking all his adult life: belonging. Not the belonging that came from professional success, material possessions, or public recognition. This was deeper, more real, the belonging to a circle of love, a web of genuine affection. Winter wore on, giving way to spring. Changes happened gradually, almost imperceptible day to day, but obvious when viewed in hindsight. Ethan started spending more nights at Rachel's apartment than at his own. First, it was the occasional night when he stayed late helping the girls with school projects, then entire weekends. Eventually, his toothbrush found a permanent spot in the bathroom. His clothes occupied a section of the closet. His books merged with Rachel's on the living room shelf. There was no official move, no big announcement or formal decision. Like everything between them, it happened naturally, at the right pace and respecting each person's space and timing. On one particularly sunny Saturday morning, the four of them were having breakfast at the small kitchen table. Sarah was recounting, in her soft voice, a strange dream about flying elephants. Emily chimed in from time to time, adding fantastic details clearly not in the original dream. Rachel and Ethan exchanged amused glances over their coffee cups. "We could go to the park today," Ethan suggested once Sarah finished her story. "The weather's perfect." "And have a picnic," Emily added, always excited about any plan. "Can I take my dolls?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Rachel answered, buttering a piece of toast. "We'll make sandwiches and bring some fruit." As they prepared for the outing, Ethan watched the family, because that's what they were now, a family. A family formed not by conventions or social expectations, but by a daily choice, by small acts of kindness, by constant presence. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were hard days, as in any family. Sarah occasionally had nightmares that made her wake up crying in the middle of the night. Emily sometimes asked why her biological father never came back, a question Rachel still struggled to answer satisfactorily. Rachel's salary, though steady, didn't always cover everything, and Ethan had to help with the bills, which sometimes caused tension due to her pride. There were arguments about discipline, about schedules, about balancing work and family life. There was exhaustion, there were frustrations, and there were practical problems to solve on a regular basis. But there was also laughter at the dinner table, spontaneous hugs, made-up bedtime stories. There was that sense of belonging that Emily had so perfectly captured in her drawing, an image of the four of them, hand in hand under the sun, smiling despite everything. One afternoon, months later, Ethan found Rachel organizing a photo album at the dining table. The girls were downstairs in the building's courtyard, enjoying the spring sunshine. "What's this?" he asked, sitting beside her. "I'm trying to organize some memories," Rachel explained, showing old photos of the girls as babies, mixed with more recent ones that included many shots of Ethan, so we don't forget how we got here. Ethan picked up a more recent photo of the four of them in the park, smiling after a picnic. It was a simple image, snapped by a stranger they'd asked for help, but it perfectly captured what they had built together. "You know what I love most about our family?" Rachel asked, watching the photo in his hands. "What?" "That we choose to be together every day. There's no obligation, no external pressure, no social expectations. Just four people who decided to be important to one another." Ethan nodded, fully understanding. In a world that often defined success by material achievements and social status, they had found something far more valuable: genuine connection, mutual support, a network of affection woven by daily care. From the open window, they could hear Emily and Sarah's laughter as they played below. Emily's drawing remained on the wall, the colors slightly faded by the sunlight that streamed in each morning, but its message as vivid as ever. "Thank you for showing up in our life." Ethan glanced at the drawing, then at Rachel, then at the view through the window where the girls were playing. His life had completely transformed since the day at the bank, when a barefoot girl tried to trade her dolls for money. They didn't live in a mansion, didn't have luxury cars or extravagant vacations. Their meals were simple. Their dusk chats happened on a tiny balcony. Their silly laughter came from the most unexpected moments. There was no luxury, there was a bond. And that, Ethan finally understood, was all that mattered. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.